The citadel of Solaran had survived wars, rebellions, and the collapse of entire star systems. For nearly 4,000 years, its walls had never failed. Its rulers had never bowed, and its power had never been questioned. Yet on this day, the High Regent Keller stood alone before a silent chamber, unable to command, threaten, or negotiate his way out of a problem no weapon could touch. Beyond the crystal barrier sat his two sons, Kale and Rin, heirs to everything he ruled. Between them was a table filled with the rarest food in the known galaxies, and still neither child had eaten in 5 long days. They will not last much longer. The chief healer said quietly, her voice trembling, despite decades of service. Their bodies are strong, but grief is stronger. I know, Keller replied, his voice low and hollow. He was feared by millions, obeyed without question, yet here he stood, powerless. Since their mother's death, the boys had decided that if she could not return, then nothing else mattered. Not food, not comfort, not the future of Solaran itself. Every solution had failed. Mind scholars, emotion readers, memory healers even. Advanced neural restorers had tried and left in defeat. Nothing reached the children. If the heirs fell, the empire would fracture. Civil war would follow. Billions of lives would change forever because 2 small hearts refused to go on. That was when Jonah Reed arrived. Jonah was human. He wore worn boots, a faded jacket, and carried a small canvas bag over his shoulder. He had been repairing water systems on the lower rings when the summons came. Assumed it was another inspection or complaint. Humans often got those. Instead, he found himself standing before a ruler whose shadow covered half the room. You have a child, Keller said, his eyes sharp but tired. Yes, sir, Jonah answered. A son, Milo. He's 7. And you care for him alone? Jonah hesitated, then nodded. His mother passed away 2 years ago. Something changed in the regent's face. The power faded for a moment, replaced by something raw and shared. My sons will not eat, Keller said. You will help them, Jonah stood outside the chamber watching the boys. They looked nothing like Milo. Their skin shimmered faintly. Their eyes reflected light in strange ways. But their posture, their stillness, the way they avoided the food in front of them, felt painfully familiar. Jonah had seen that same look. At his kitchen table once, he took a breath and stepped inside. Hey, he said gently, pulling out a chair and sitting down. Mind if I eat? I skipped lunch. The boys stared at him, cold and silent. Jonah opened his bag and pulled out a small wrapped snack. This is from Earth. Nothing fancy. You eat while we suffer? Kale asked bitterly.
Ow.
Jonah replied calmly. Sometimes that helps. He took a bite, chewing slowly. Then he smiled. Back home we have a game. It's for kids who don't feel like eating. We're not children, Rin snapped. Jonah raised his eyebrows. Oh, my mistake. You look about 100 years old? Rin paused. We are 9. Jonah nodded. Ancient. We picked up a piece of fruit from the table and moved it through the air. This is Flight 1, requesting permission to land. That is foolish, Kale said. Very foolish, Jonah agreed. Totally silly. He brought the fruit toward his own mouth. How does it land? Rin asked quietly. Jonah smiled. Only if the tower says it's okay. The boys watched closely. The tower says. Jonah paused, then softened his voice, open wide. Rin hesitated, then took a small bite. The room felt different after that. The silence cracked. Jonah spoke softly about his son, about nights when Milo refused to eat, when laughter felt wrong, when sadness filled every corner. Being silly didn't erase the pain, Jonah said. It just reminded us that pain isn't the only thing left. Kale's eyes shimmered. We miss her, he whispered. I know, Jonah said, and you always will. That doesn't mean you stop living. Another bite. Then another. Soon the boys were arguing about whether spaceships could be airplanes. 3 hours later, the table was empty. From the observation deck, Keller watched his sons laugh for the first time since their loss. His hands shook. You have saved my empire, he said when Jonah emerged. Jonah shrugged. I just fed 2 kids. Keller bowed his head. He gave them joy when they thought joy was gone. That is greater than power. Inside the chamber, a voice called out, Jonah. He says stars don't count as clouds. Jonah grinned and turned back. And in that moment, the High Regent understood something no history record ever taught. Strength was not force, it was kindness. And sometimes, the smallest human act could hold an entire universe together. The days that followed felt different inside the citadel of Solaran. The halls were the same, the guards stood in the same places, and the Empire still moved with perfect precision, but something unseen had shifted. Laughter echoed where silence once lived. The heirs no longer avoided the dining chambers. Ran through them, arguing loudly, inventing games, turning formal meals into playful competitions that left servants both horrified and relieved. Jonah stayed. At first it was meant to be temporary, a few days, maybe a week, just until the boys were stable. But grief does not heal on a schedule, and Kale and Rin followed Jonah everywhere. They asked endless questions about Earth, about rain that fell, without warning, about animals that made strange noises, about why humans smiled even when things hurt. Jonah answered all of it patiently. Some nights, when the palace lights dimmed, the boys would sit beside him and talk about their mother. Not in whispers anymore. They spoke of her voice, her stories, the way she used to sing off-key during meals. Jonah never interrupted. He just listened. He knew that silence, too. He knew how heavy memories could be when they finally came back. One evening, Keller watched from a distance as Jonah helped the boys prepare dinner. Not directing servants, not issuing commands, standing there, sleeves rolled up, letting the children decide what went on their plates. It was chaos. Food was uneven. Nothing followed protocol. Yet the boys ate every bite. You are changing. Them, Keller said later. Jonah shook his head. No, they're changing themselves. I'm just nearby. Word spread quickly. Other nobles noticed the difference. Advisors whispered. Some were uneasy. The empire was built on discipline, tradition, and order. What place did a human with jokes and games have in shaping future rulers? But Keller remembered the empty plates, the fading light in his children's eyes. And he made his choice. Jonah was given a permanent role, not as a commander, not as an official strategist, but as something new, something unheard of. A human presence. A reminder. One morning, Jonah received a message from Earth. His son Milo appeared on the screen, smiling wide. Dad, guess what? I made a friend today. Jonah felt his chest tighten. He looked across the room at Kale and Rin, now arguing about whose turn it was to clean up. He smiled back at the screen. That's great, buddy. I'm proud of you. That night, Jonah told the boys about Milo, about how kids everywhere struggled, about how lost didn't belong to one world. Kale listened carefully. Rin nodded slowly. So humans hurt like we do, Rin said. Yeah, Jonah replied. We just keep going anyway. The stars outside the citadel burned bright, ancient, and endless. Among them, something new took root. Not an alliance built on power, not a treaty written in law, but a quiet understanding. Empires could survive wars. They could endure time. But they were held together by something far smaller. A shared meal. A silly game. And the courage to laugh again, even when the universe had taken something precious. Away as weeks passed, Jonah began to notice things no one else seemed to see. The boys were eating, laughing, and learning again. Yes, but grief still lived quietly inside them. It showed up in small moments. When a song played too softly in the background and both boys froze. When a servant mentioned their mother's name without realizing it. When night came and the citadel grew too quiet. Some evenings, Kale would stop talking mid-sentence and stare out the window. Rin would pretend not to notice, but his hands would tighten at his sides. Jonah had seen this before. Healing was not a straight line. It never was. One night, long after the palace lights dimmed, Jonah heard soft footsteps outside his quarters. When he opened the door, both boys stood there, trying to look brave. We cannot sleep, Kale said. The dreams return, Rin added. Jonah nodded and stepped aside. He didn't call guards, didn't notify physicians. He simply pulled 2 blankets from his bed and spread them on the floor. On Earth, he said quietly, we call this a camp night. They sat together, backs against the wall. Jonah told them stories. It's not heroic legends or empire histories, but small ones. About Milo losing his first tooth, about burning dinner and ordering food instead, about laughing so hard during a sad moment that it almost felt wrong. Is it bad, Kale asked slowly, to laugh when she is gone? Jonah looked at him carefully. No, it's how you honor the part of her that loved seeing you smile. The boys slept that night. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Keller requested Jonah's presence in the council hall. The room was massive, carved from luminous stone, filled with beings who had ruled systems for centuries. Jonah felt completely out of place. The human influence is noticeable, one counselor said carefully. Too noticeable, another added. The heirs behave informally. Traditions are bending. Keller listened in silence. Jonah cleared his throat. With respect, they're children, not symbols, not tools. Just kids who lost their mom. The room fell silent. Keller stood. This empire nearly lost its future because we forgot that. Decision was final. Jonah stayed. But the story did not end within palace walls. Other worlds took notice. Diplomatic envoys arrived, curious about the change in Solarin. They expected weakness. Instead, they found stability. The heirs were sharper, more present, more compassionate. They listened before speaking. They asked questions. They remembered names. One visiting delegate watched Kale help a servant clean spilled food and whispered, "Well." They ruled differently. Jonah knew what that meant. One afternoon, Kale approached Jonah with a serious expression. If I become ruler, one day he asked, will people still expect me to never feel pain? Jonah thought for a moment. Some will, but the best ones won't. Rin tilted his head. And if we feel it anyway, then you don't hide it, Jonah said. You learn from it. Far away on Earth, Milo sent drawings. Stick figures holding hands beneath strange stars. Jonah taped them to the wall. Kale and Rin studied them like sacred art. That one is you? Kale asked. Yeah, Jonah smiled. And that messy one is Milo? Time moved forward, slowly, gently. The citadel of Solarin no longer felt like a monument to power alone. It felt lived in, warm, human, in ways no one expected. And somewhere between shared meals, late-night talks, and quiet understanding, the Empire learned a truth that would shape its future for generations. Strength did not come from never breaking it. It came from breaking, healing, and choosing to keep going together. The change did not go unnoticed forever. Beyond Solarin's borders, there were systems that ruled through fear alone. Leaders who believed grief was weakness, compassion was inefficiency, and laughter had no place in power. When reports reached them about the heirs of Solarin eating with servants, asking questions instead of giving orders, and openly speaking about loss, they saw opportunity. They are soft, one warlord sneered during a shadow council. Out. Things break, another replied. The first challenge came quietly. A neighboring sector delayed trade shipments, testing Solarin's response. In the past, Keller would have answered with threats or fleets. This time, Kale and Rin sat beside him during the council meeting. They listened. They asked why the delay happened, not how to punish it. Jonah watched from the side of the room, heart steady but alert. Maybe they are afraid, Rin said slowly. Fear makes people hold back, Kale added. Keller studied his sons. Then he nodded. They sent aid instead of weapons. Medical supplies. Food. A message that said, we noticed you are struggling. The trade resumed within days. That moment became a turning point. Some in the Empire resisted. Old generals complained that kindness would invite rebellion. Jonah heard the whispers, felt the tension in the air. He also saw the boys grow steadier, more confident, their grief no longer steering them but shaping them. One evening, Kale sat beside Jonah on the balcony overlooking the stars. Do you ever stop missing her? Kale asked. Head, no. But the missing changes. It becomes quieter. It's like a scar that reminds you of survival, not pain. Kale considered this. Rin joined them, holding a small object in his hands. It was a carved symbol, rough and uneven. We made this, he said. For our mother, and for yours. Jonah's throat tightened. As seasons passed, Jonah prepared for something he had avoided thinking about. Milo needed him. Earth waited. His role had never been meant to be permanent. When Jonah finally told the boys, they were silent for a long time. You will return? Rin asked. I will, Jonah said. But even if I'm not here every day, what we built doesn't disappear. Kale nodded slowly. He taught us how to live with pain. Keller stood nearby, listening. On Jonah's final day, the Citadel gathered. Not for ceremony, for a meal. Long tables, shared dishes, laughter echoing through ancient halls. As Jonah walked toward the transport bay, Kale called out, Jonah? He turned. We will teach others, Kale said firmly. What you taught? Us. Jonah smiled. Then I did my job. As his ship lifted into the stars, Solaren did not feel empty. It felt ready. Ready for rulers who understood that empires are not held together by fear or force, but by the simple courage to care, even when it hurts. And far away, on a small blue planet, a human child waited to hear stories about two alien brothers who learned how to laugh again. The universe kept moving. But something fundamental had changed, not through conquest, not through technology, but through one ordinary human, a shared table, and the quiet truth that grief, when met with kindness, can become the strongest foundation of all. Long after the moment had passed, long after the laughter of two grieving children had filled the halls of Solaren again, the story continued to grow in quiet, unseen ways. Historians would one day mark that era as the beginning of a transformation. They would write about stabilized borders, fewer rebellions, and alliances that lasted longer than anyone expected. Scholars would debate what policy shift caused it. Some would credit diplomacy. Others would point to leadership reforms or cultural exchange. None of them would fully understand the truth, because the real change was never announced. It was never enforced, and it was never written into any law. Kale and Rin grew older beneath the same stars that once felt so cold and distant. They trained in strategy halls and command chambers, but they also stayed in the kitchens. They spoke with guards. They learned names, asked how people were doing, and then waited for the answer. When they felt the weight of grief return, they did not push it away. They remembered the night they learned that sadness and joy could exist in the same breath. When Kale finally stood before the gathered systems as leader of Solaren, the chamber was silent. Not from fear, but from attention. He did not speak of dominance or expansion. He spoke of responsibility. We were once children who believed the universe had taken everything from us, he said. But we learned that loss does not end life. It reshapes it. How we treat others in their pain decides what kind of rulers we become. Many listening did not fully understand those words, but they felt them. Far away on Earth, Jonah watched the address on a small screen mounted above a cluttered kitchen counter. The paint on the walls was chipped. The floor creaked. Milo sat cross-legged on the chair beside him, older now, but still leaning close. Is that really them? Milo asked quietly. Jonah smiled. Yeah, that's them. The broadcast ended. The room returned to normal sounds, a ticking clock, dishes waiting to be washed, life moving forward just as it always did. No grand music, no applause. And somehow that made it feel more real. Jonah turned off the screen and went back to being a dad. That had always been the point. Across the stars, solar and endured. Not because it was perfect, not because it was powerful, but because it was led by those who understood what it meant to hurt and still choose care. Other worlds noticed. Slowly, almost invisibly, they began to change too. Empires rose and fell as they always had. But this one lasted. And at its foundation was not fear or force or ambition. It was a memory of a shared meal, of laughter, during grief, of a human who reminded the universe of something it had forgotten. That strength is not found in never breaking. It is found in how gently we hold each other when we do. And that truth, once released, traveled farther than any fleet, echoing through generations, through stars, through time itself.